Well, I think there gradually is an increased understanding of risk, and that's been generated by events like Fukushima, like Katrina, like the typhoon in the Philippines. It's continually reminding people and politicians that risk is there. It doesn't always lead to effective mitigation solutions for a variety of reasons. But I think the consciousness is there, and it's spread by the media, the internet, social media, the fact that people all over the world could observe the Philippines typhoon in real time, could see it happening. Inconceivable 30 years ago. Inconceivable. So there's no hiding from risk, and that applies to politicians as well as the public. But they don't always react to it. Maybe they can't afford to. Maybe they've got other priorities. If you ask the man on the street or the woman in the street, are they worried about flooding here in Bangalore? They'll say, no, I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about my mother who's ill. I'm worried about my children's education. They've got overriding worries. Flooding or earthquakes come low down in everybody's consciousness of disasters that affect their particular family, whether it's an extended family or a nuclear family. So there is progress and there's no progress. I don't think myself it needs to be redefined. There's been some discussion in the meeting about whether we should have a reframing of the notions about risk. I'm not convinced, because the general acceptance of the kinds of risks that we're talking about is only 20, 30 years old, really. That's quite a short time in the public's consciousness. And I think we need to build on what they know already, rather than replace it with new concepts which may just confuse as opposed to clarify. It depends on which country you're talking about. In my field, which is flood risk management, in my country, which is a rich country, the United Kingdom, the procedures in place are pretty good. Okay, there's never enough money, but there's never enough money for anything. Procedures are equitable across the country. They're fairly rigorous. The analysis is clear, well-founded on data. But that's the exception, of course. We have to recognize that other parts of the world don't have the same information, they don't have the same money, they don't have the same systems, they have the same politics. So I don't think you can answer that question with anything that's at all general. It's so much context specific. I don't know about India. I've been talking to somebody over lunch who says there are 4,600 dams in India, and there isn't one that's got a dam safety analysis, a dam emergency plan. That could be a huge deficit. But it's country specific. Well, history tells us, unfortunately, that you can only raise the profile of disaster risk management after there has been a disaster. And you've had your own disasters, industrial disasters, you've had cyclones in Andhra Pradesh and Orissa, and those temporarily raise the profile politically to a level where something might get done. And for example, I've studied in Andhra Pradesh, and there is serious discussion about mitigation for cyclone threats. But actually what's been done in the last 25 years in terms of warning systems has been fantastic. And your evacuation procedures are now in place. So there has been a lot of progress. Progress, however, seems to be driven by events, not by a rational analysis, which perhaps we as scientists would want to see happen. It doesn't seem to work like that, I'm afraid. Children's education, health, hospitals, clinics, roads, railways, they have a higher political profile. Sometimes we just have to accept that. But when a window of opportunity comes, then we must grasp it and be ready for it. It's not proven in many parts of the world that climate change necessarily increases disaster risk. So we need to make that clearer if we can. And that probably means further downscaling of the global circulation models. And that's happening. So that we can say something about what is the risk for Bangalore? Or what is the risk for Delhi? Or what is the risk for Mumbai? So we need to make it more specific. I mean, the most obvious example of climate change-induced risk is sea level rise, which has already happened, and it's projected to go on happening, and there's very little we can do to stop it. In the fluvial environment, it's not so clear. It's not so clear at all. But where it is clear, we need to take action, and around the coasts of India, there will be places where increased vulnerability will be quite serious. And maybe we start there, where it can be easily demonstrated, as have happened now, not something that might happen in 25 or 50 years' time. Let's try and concentrate where the evidence is strongest to draw those linkages between disaster risk and climate change. It's easy to exaggerate the pitfalls of the concept. I mean, not many people would want us not to be resilient. Okay, so that's a starting point. We don't want to be unresilient, irresilient, whatever the opposite is. But I do take Andrew Maskey's point about the fact that it rather assumes that the status quo is satisfactory. And that's not a good position to have. So I think we need to have a position of resilience plus, so that we don't reinstate communities with the status quo in risky areas from which they've just suffered a disaster. That doesn't make any sense. So we need to have some sort of concept of resilience plus. That's quite difficult. I can see lots of links between risk and resilience, because presumably a resilient community will be less badly affected by disaster than a community that is not resilient, whatever that means. When you link it to sustainable development, I begin to have problems, because it's such a wobbly concept. And it's wonderful to talk about, but very difficult to measure. So I suppose you could say that a sustainable city was one that didn't regularly get hit by major disasters, or even minor disasters for that matter, because it'll disrupt people, kill people, harm their livelihoods. So we have a concept of a safe city, which I think I would prefer the term safe city to a sustainable city, because the oil majors would say a sustainable oil well is one that produces a lot of oil. Well, just a minute. Not sure we're happy with that. And there was discussion about a sustainable coal industry. So the concept can be corrupted. Now the question is, can the concept of a safe city be corrupted? I wonder. It's a little less easy to do that, or a secure city. And if you talk about safety and security, it will involve other forms of safety, road traffic safety, the safety of women on the streets, which has been talked about, of whether they're safe to walk about our Indian or our other cities alone at night, for example. It does stretch the concept, but it's also a concept that's familiar to both the person out there on the street and the politicians in government. If you said to a politician, do you want your city to be safe? He or she would say, of course. If you talk to a person out there, do you want your life to be secure? They'd say, of course. It's an easily understood concept. If you ask the person out there, do you want Bangalore to be a sustainable city? They'll say, what do you mean? And therefore, it leads to questions. Safety, security, which we really try and promote through disaster risk reduction, is a cleaner concept, less easy to corrupt. That's my idea. Well, I'd answer that in two ways, one of which is firstly negative and one's positive. I'm not entirely convinced that international agreements in this area have a lot of traction. They may do, they may not do, so that's a bit of a negative thought. But they probably, over time, influence the nature of debates, they influence the degree of awareness, and therefore they do no harm in that respect, and probably do some good. On balance, I suppose they do a little bit of good, and they don't do much harm. I don't think we should overestimate the impact. I think we have to be careful not to raise expectations. But I think a renewed emphasis on disaster risk management, not reduction, but management, a more systematic monitoring system, if that can lead to better practices on the ground, and a linkage, I think, probably with the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the disaster risk reduction objectives, would probably help, as long as it doesn't get lost in the process. And that is the danger. As you broaden the horizon, or broaden the table on which things are being discussed and have more people involved, some things might drop off. That's the danger. And I'm worried about that danger. I think we need to keep disaster risk management strong and current in the consciousness of politicians where it is now, and don't give them the excuse to let it drop off the table. Well, I suppose the message is, this is the message of a researcher, really. I suppose the message is that good quality information can be used to change people's minds. It tends to be quite expensive, but not as expensive as suffering major disasters. So we need to be acutely aware that targeted collection of good quality information on potential risks can raise the profile of those risks both locally and nationally. And it's certainly in my country, and I see it in other countries as well, that can move actions, can create traction, can generate attention. It does take time and it takes money, and ideally want to do it systematically. But again, even occasionally really good case studies, people can say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was a problem. And that can actually move things, as well as all the politics that goes with it. So I suppose I'm saying that the kind of things that you do here in IIHS, and that I do in my country, and other people do in other countries, we keep plugging away at giving good, accurate, honest information about the risks that people face. And if they decide to ignore them, well, that's up to them, I'm afraid, in the end. But at least we've done our part.